Joining me now is Robin Rue Simmons. She spearheaded that project in Evanston and is a former alderman of the city's 5th Ward. Also with us is Dr. Robert Patterson, professor and inaugural chair of the Department of African American Studies at Georgetown University. He's also author of the upcoming book, Black Equity, Black Equality, Reparation in the Black Communities. Both of you, thank you so much for joining on this Sunday morning. Robin, let's start with you. Take us through the process of getting reparations for the Black community in Evanston. How to get started? What's the current state of the program?
Thank you. Before I do that, I have to say Happy Father's Day to my fathers, Buford Fennell, and to all the fathers out there. But how we got started was how many other communities and institutions and the United States government should get started is in hearing from the Black community on what repair looks like based on our harm. And very hyper-locally in Evanston, by consensus, as you mentioned, we started with housing. But it's important to note that the Black community is looking for all forms of repair: housing grants, cash payments, business grants, access to education and healthcare, and so on. But through a community process, our reparations committee was informed and established our first remedy, which is a $25,000 housing benefit, direct benefit that will build wealth for families in Evanston that have been harmed by discriminating practices in our Black community.
Just out of curiosity, what was the pushback? Was it intense? Was it not? And what's the success been? And how do you measure success?
Well, I'll tell you, in our city, we are progressive, and there was not initial pushback. There was caution on making sure that it's legal, that it is constitutional, that it's viable. But we all were in consensus on moving forward with reparations for the most part. The challenges come in, how do we prioritize what form of repair? We started with housing. Some may want to have a different form of reparations. And now, even outside of our community, conservative groups have threatened to challenge legally our efforts in Evanston. But we have a strong city staff, Corporation Counsel, and Nick Cummings that is ready to defend our values and our legislation in Evanston if it should come to that.
Gotcha. And Dr. Patterson, when we talk about reparations, most people plainly think, oh, it's just giving cash to people. But as Robin noted, there are clearly different ways to do it. As you know, as an academic, I'm just sort of curious, what do you think are the most beneficial ways to execute reparations and why?
Good morning, and echoing Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there as well. Yes. So a couple points I think is important, and this is why I think that the task force recommendations from California and their executive summary was phenomenal in many ways, because it draws attention to the fact that reparations have several components of it. Some are actually financial direct payments. Others are payments that benefit institutions within communities. So you, for example, could see trying to level out the funding of schools as an example. And in addition to that, part of what I think is so important about the report that California, the task force, issues is that it really makes the explicit connection from slavery to Reconstruction, to Jim Crow, to the contemporary moment where there are state and federal policies that intentionally and actively discriminated against Black communities that actually have caused these wealth gaps, that have caused these education gaps, that have caused these health disparities, and that these are not just cash handouts, and that the way to decrease, the way to eliminate the racial equity gap is to provide funding to close those areas that we know the government actually was very active in doing in terms of housing and displacing through urban renewal. And so it seems like a multi-pronged approach that includes direct payments, that includes loans, as they're doing in Evanston, that includes grants, and that address a range of areas where discrimination was legalized, systemic, and persistent.
I don't think I'm, revealing anything crazy here, but Dr. Patterson, we're in an age right now of intense backlash to the idea that there's systemic racism in our society coming from the right. What do you think is responsible for that, and how does that change the political dynamics around any discussion around reparations?
Right. So that's why I say I think that the historical connections that the task force in California attempts to make is important, because it actually shows that no, racism, this is not a figment of one's imagination. It doesn't have to be this overt, individual expression of racism, for example, where someone is saying, I'm intentionally doing this. It can be through policies and procedures that were designed to keep Black people excluded. I mean, the report, for example, makes a point that even before Plessy versus Ferguson, the state of California had decided that segregation in schools was legal. And so part of what I think the issue on the right partially is a willful ignorance towards history. And I think that part of what people who are interested in making a case for reparations continue to have to do is to show, number one, this is not a handout, but rather this is a historical process that has accumulated across time. And in addition to that, have to show that the advantages that white people have gotten, for example, has been a result of policies that have benefited them. And it's not just from this rhetoric of hard work and diligence and that type of conversation that actually includes what had happened historically and in the present moment.
And Robin, pretty quickly here, a new documentary being shown at the Tribeca Film Festival titled The Big Payback follows your journey to obtain $10 million to be distributed to Evanston's Black residents as reparations, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's fight to get H.R. 40 passed after all this time. Let's listen to a quick clip.
We were so excited when we saw the legislation. In fact, we have used it in presentations that we've made.
Wow.
I use your outstanding construct. You've been, Councilmember, a real hero to me. Really
Thank you. Thank you. Being a member of National League of Cities, we learned that all government starts locally. And the thought was, why not do what we can do here at a local level while HR 40 is working through its process, through your leadership? We could have layers of repair and layers of remedy because, as we know, those damages, yes, were rooted in slavery, but, it looked like discrimination even still today because of the color of our dark skin.
All right, Robin, we have half a minute here. I'm so sorry, but what can reparations advocates learn from that film and from your work?
Well, you can learn that the process is complicated and it must start. That's how you do reparations, you start. You can learn that there are over 100 cities now that are advancing local reparations and that we have more support ever in Congress. You can call for an executive order to be signed by President Biden for the commission to be established. And you can see a free screening of The Big Payback at the Apollo Theater today in New York City, sponsored by Ben & Jerry's. Thank you.
Oh, Ben & Jerry's, that sounds delicious. Robin Ruth Simmons and Dr. Robert J. Patterson, thank you so much.